Hi guys, tonight we're going to uncover a story buried deep within the blazing canyons of Arizona. It's about a mine said to be overflowing with gold, but everyone who dared seek it vanished, went mad, or met a gruesome fate. This is the legend of the lost Dutchman's mine, a treasure cursed not just by the land, but by time itself. Now close your eyes if you'd like, and drift with me into the heat and stillness of the desert. But before we begin, if you're someone who loves slow, curious dives into forgotten worlds, tap the like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to get to know my viewers better. The Superstition Mountains are not named lightly. Even their jagged silhouette against the horizon seems to whisper secrets too old to speak aloud. Locals say the rocks remember everything. The footsteps, the screams, the echoes of dreams turn to dust. Long before Americans ever mapped these lands, the Apache knew them as sacred. They called them Thunder God's Land and kept away. Stories passed from one campfire to another, warned of strange disappearances, lights that moved without source, and caves that led not just into the mountain, but into something older and darker. In the mid-1800s, tales of Spanish conquistadors carrying away sacks of glittering gold made their way across the Southwest. Some believed the source was an ancient mine, hidden in those very peaks, but no one had ever returned to confirm it. That is, until a man named Jacob Waltz arrived. A German immigrant, solitary and deliberate, Waltz didn't come seeking legends. But one summer, during a stay in Phoenix, he let something slip, something about a hidden mine, somewhere in the Superstitions. He spoke little, but just enough for those around him to understand. He'd found it. They say he'd appear in town with gold unlike anything seen before. Rich, heavy, unmistakably pure. But when asked where it came from, he'd only smile and mutter in broken English, "From my mine, but no one find." Over time his words began to draw people in. Men from across the West, miners, gamblers, drifters, made their way to Arizona, following a trail of half-truths, sketches, and feverish rumors. Most never came back. The few who did spoke of nights filled with whispering winds that didn't belong to the air, of paths that looped back on themselves, of eyes watching from the cliffs. Some returned sunburnt and silent, unable to explain why they'd turned back. Others were found, changed. One prospector was discovered weeks later, sitting at the base of a boulder, staring into the sand, mouth open, eyes wide, not a word left in him. Jacob Waltz died in 1891, and on his deathbed, he reportedly gave a cryptic map and instructions to a woman who cared for him, Julia Thomas. She tried to find the mine, but failed. Everyone who held that map after her seemed to share the same fate: obsession, desperation, and disappearance. Yet the promise of the mine never faded. Even today, hikers and treasure hunters still vanish trying to find it. And the Superstition Mountains remain quiet, watching, waiting. This is only the beginning of what would become one of America's most enduring mysteries. In the next part, we'll travel deeper into the first real search party that believed they had uncovered the trail. But what they found instead would change everything. In the spring of 1892, just months after Jacob Waltz passed away, 3 men gathered in a cramped saloon on the edge of Phoenix. They were not friends, just 3 strangers brought together by a whisper, a clue, a shared hunger for something more than the dust in their boots. There was Richard Red Dawson, a former cavalry scout with eyes that didn't blink often. Elmer Cook, a schoolteacher turned miner who carried a notebook full of strange calculations. And Tomaso Alvarez, a young Mexican-American drifter who claimed to have met a man once, deep in Sonora, who'd spoken of the mountain that kills. Each of them had heard a different version of the tale, but all of their stories converged on the same location, a narrow canyon at the base of the Superstitions. The locals had another name for it: La Puerta del Diablo, the Devil's Door. Armed with rifles, pickaxes, canteens, and an aging copy of Julia Thomas's sketch, the men set out before dawn. The trail grew colder with each mile, the sun higher, and the silence thicker. By the third day, they found what they believed was their first real sign. A half-buried stone marker shaped like a jagged arrow, pointing toward a sheer rock face with no visible cave. It took hours of searching before Alvarez cried out. He'd found a crevice, so narrow it looked like a crack in the earth. One by one they squeezed inside. The temperature dropped instantly. The air grew stale. A strange hum echoed from within the walls. Not a sound exactly, more like a vibration you could feel in your teeth. They followed it. The passage led to a chamber no wider than a wagon, but the floor glittered faintly. At first they thought it was mica. Then Red picked up a chunk and laughed, not with joy, but disbelief. It was gold, raw, uncut, still fused to black quartz, more than any of them had ever seen. For a long time no one spoke. Then Cook whispered, "We found it, it's real." But as they began to fill their sacks, the humming grew louder. And stranger. It no longer came from the walls, it came from beneath their feet. Tommaso said he felt the rock shifting. They all stopped. A low grinding began, as if the mountain were clearing its throat. Then came the crash. A boulder from the ceiling gave way and slammed to the ground, narrowly missing Red. Dust blinded them, their lantern shattered. The darkness was instant and total. In the scramble to escape, Tommaso tripped. Cook reached for him, but another stone fell between them. Red and Cook barely made it out. When they turned back, Tommaso was gone. They waited all night, calling his name. But nothing came out of that crack. Not sound, not wind, not even the scent of earth. Just silence. At sunrise, they sealed the entrance with what rocks they could find. And then they walked away, back to Phoenix, back to the world. Cook never returned to mining. He sold his share of gold and moved to Maine. Red disappeared from records 2 years later. As for the map, they burned it. But that wasn't the end. Word of their discovery spread, twisted, and took root in other desperate minds. In the next part, we'll follow a new seeker, one who believed that Waltz left more than just a map behind, something carved in stone. Something that shouldn't have survived the desert. In the winter of 1895, a man named Albert Granger arrived in Arizona with nothing but a worn suitcase and a letter clutched in his coat. The letter, stained and torn, had been written by his uncle, none other than Elmer Cook. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the message was clear. Don't go looking for the mine, it cost me everything. But if you must, look for the stone that bleeds at sunset. Granger had been only 10 when his uncle vanished from the family. But that final note stirred something deep within him. He wasn't a treasure hunter. He'd worked as a surveyor back in Missouri. But something about the phrasing, the mention of a bleeding stone, made him feel as if it wasn't gold his uncle had found, but something else entirely. He took lodging in a small adobe cabin near the town of Apache Junction. The locals, weathered and wary, didn't talk much about the superstitions. But when Granger mentioned the stone that bled, one old rancher raised an eyebrow and nodded slowly. He'd heard of it too. Said there was a red-streaked monolith near Weaver's Needle that turned crimson at sundown, though no one dared approach it. Some said it was iron, others said it was cursed. Granger marked his map and set out the next morning, determined to see it with his own eyes. The hike was brutal. Wind carved through the canyons like invisible knives, and the path often vanished beneath dry brush and shifting gravel. But he pressed on. As dusk approached, he found it. A towering spire of rock, narrow and jagged, with a long crimson vein running through its center. At first it seemed ordinary, but as the sun dipped below the ridgeline, the stone ignited in color. The red deepened, glowed, and shimmered like fresh blood in a bowl of fire. Granger felt a cold ripple down his spine. There was a small engraving near the base, barely visible, 3 intersecting arrows, forming a triangle. He sketched it. Later, back at his cabin, he scoured every book and journal he had brought, searching for a match. And he found one, not in a mining ledger, but in an old Spanish missionary record. The symbol was used by Jesuits to mark places of divine danger, zones not to be disturbed. According to the record, it was a warning, not a signpost. The following day, Granger returned, drawn to the symbol's mystery. He circled the stone, found a hidden path behind it, and followed a trail of half-buried markers that spiraled into a ravine. There, wedged between two cliffs, was a rock wall shaped like a door. It bore the same symbol, faint but unmistakable. He camped nearby that night, unable to sleep. Coyotes howled in the distance. Wind moaned through the canyons like a distant voice. When morning came, he approached the door. He placed his hand on the symbol. And then, faintly he heard it, humming. Low, rhythmic, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the stone. He stepped back. Something inside him said, "This is not for you." Granger left the mountains that day. He never told anyone what he heard, but he made a copy of the symbol and passed it on to a friend, a geologist named Helen Pierce. That copy, decades later, would lead to a discovery buried deeper than any mine. In the next part, we'll meet Helen, and how science tried to explain a legend that refused to stay buried. Helen Pierce was not a woman who believed in curses. She believed in fault lines, sediment, magnetic fields, and measurable data. As one of the few female geologists working in the American Southwest during the early 20th century, she was used to skepticism, but not from rocks. She had studied volcanic patterns in New Mexico, mapped ancient lava tubes near Flagstaff, and published 3 papers on desert erosion. So when a letter from her late friend Albert Granger arrived posthumously, she didn't expect it to change her life. The letter was simple. A drawing of a triangle formed by 3 arrows, a rough map of the Superstition Mountains, and a single sentence written in Granger's slanted hand. "If I vanish, blame the stone that hums." Helen had known Albert for years. He wasn't prone to drama, so she took the letter seriously. Not as a supernatural warning, but as a mystery worth investigating. In the fall of 1923, she gathered a small team and hiked into the Superstitions. Her official reason was to study magnetic anomalies reported in the region, compasses that spun without cause, watches that stopped, and animals that refused to cross certain areas. But privately, she wanted to find the stone. The first few days were uneventful. Dust, heat, rattlesnakes. But on the 4th day, they reached Weaver's Needle. And by sundown, she saw it, the bleeding stone. Just as Albert described, it lit up like fire, as the last rays of the sun caught the red streak. Her assistant, a quiet man named Porter, noted the triangle symbol and confirmed it was not a natural formation. "Carved," he muttered. "Old." They set up camp nearby and took measurements. The next morning, Helen walked the perimeter alone. Behind the stone, she found a narrow descent that led to a shadowed crevice. A path of smooth stones guided her steps, too evenly placed to be chance. And then, there it was, the same rock wall Albert had described. She touched the symbol. The humming started again. At first she thought it was her imagination, or maybe the result of the canyon amplifying natural vibrations. But when she placed her ear to the stone, she heard it. Steady, slow, like a machine breathing in the deep. That night, their equipment malfunctioned. Compass needles jerked toward the rock. Their radio emitted static, then silence, and one of the tents collapsed without wind. Porter wanted to leave. "This isn't geology," he whispered. "It's something else." Helen insisted they stay one more night. But around 2 a.m. she woke to find Porter gone. His boots, pack, and notebook were still inside the tent. Only his flashlight was missing. She called out, but the mountains swallowed her voice. By morning, there was still no trace. Helen left the mountain alone. She never published her findings. But she did one thing. She etched the symbol into the inside cover of her personal field journal, next to one cryptic note, "Man-made, not Spanish. Older. The journal, forgotten in a university archive, would go unread for nearly 80 years. And when it was finally rediscovered, it would reignite the search for the mine once more, but with new eyes and new obsessions. In the next part, we'll jump to the modern era. To a man who believed technology could finally reveal what instinct could not, the true location of the lost Dutchman's cursed treasure. By the time Dr. Eric Rourke first read Helen Pierce's journal in 2004, he had already spent a decade studying lost civilizations and unexplained geological phenomena. A professor at a Midwestern university and a frequent guest on late-night history podcasts, Rourke had a reputation for walking the line between science and folklore. He didn't believe in curses exactly, but he did believe that human history was filled with patterns. When he stumbled across Helen's journal in a dusty university archive, he was looking for something else entirely. But the moment he saw the triangle of arrows and read her note, man-made, not Spanish, older, his interest sharpened. He scanned the pages, and the mention of the stone that hums triggered something. A memory. Years earlier, he'd received a letter from a retired forest ranger who claimed his compass stopped working near Weaver's Needle, and that hikers often reported a deep rumble in the rocks, especially near dusk. Most dismissed it as seismic tremors or wind patterns. But now, with Helen's first-hand account from 1923, the pieces seemed to align. Rourke submitted a quiet proposal for a sabbatical and flew to Arizona that November. He brought with him a collection of magnetometers, ground-penetrating radar, and a digital mapping drone. He also hired a local guide named Lila, a former park ranger with years of experience navigating the superstitions. She didn't care much for treasure stories, but she respected the land, and she knew where the rocks could fool a man into walking in circles. They hiked out with minimal gear, relying on Lila's navigation and Eric's instruments. By the third day they found it, the bleeding stone. The red streak was just as vivid, and though Eric was skeptical, the magnetometer readings were undeniable, sharp spikes in magnetic field intensity that made no geological sense. Even Lila looked uneasy. "It's like the rocks are alive," she said. They camped near the stone, and at sunset, Eric deployed the drone. It hovered for hours, scanning terrain patterns invisible to the human eye. At precisely 3:12 a.m., the equipment froze. Every screen turned black. A low-frequency hum began, not from the machines, but from the ground itself. Eric felt it in his bones. He stood slowly, flashlight in hand, and walked toward the stone. As he approached, the humming intensified. Lila called after him, but he didn't answer. When he placed his hand on the triangle, everything stopped. Silence. Stillness. Then, a click. The stone beneath him shifted, just slightly, but enough to notice. A crack appeared at its base. Lila grabbed his arm and pulled him back. "We're not ready," she said, her voice shaking. "This isn't a mine, it's a lock." The next morning they examined the crack. Inside, only darkness. No tunnel, no visible gold, just a black void that seemed to breathe cold air. Eric marked the location, took notes, but didn't go in. He felt something watching from within. Instead, they packed up and left. Back at the university, Eric kept the data private. But as with all secrets, it didn't stay buried for long. A grad student leaked a portion of the scan to a treasure hunting forum, and within weeks, speculation exploded. Theories ranged from Spanish vaults, to Native American burial grounds, to ancient alien bases. But none of them were prepared for what came next. A solo explorer, following Eric's leaked coordinates, would enter that crack alone. He would document everything, up to the point the footage cut off. In the next part, we'll examine that lost footage. And what it shows in the final seconds is something no one, not even skeptics, can easily explain. His name was Ryan Kelso, 34 years old, a former software engineer turned freelance survival vlogger. Ryan had built a modest following on YouTube documenting his solo expeditions into abandoned towns, off-limits military sites, and remote wilderness trails. He wasn't reckless, just curious. When he stumbled across the leaked drone coordinates in a forgotten corner of a treasure hunting forum, he knew he had to see it for himself. The phrase "stone that hums" stuck with him. He cross-referenced the area with old topographical maps, pinpointed the suspected entrance beneath Weaver's Needle, and quietly flew to Arizona without telling even his closest friends where he was going. His plan was simple: film a short documentary, explore the crevice, and prove or disprove the myth of the lost Dutchman's mine. In February 2005, he set out alone with 2 cameras, one body-mounted and one handheld, plus a satellite phone, climbing gear, and a week's worth of supplies. His first videos show nothing unusual: dry, thorny trails, the occasional desert hare, and sweeping shots of the Superstition Mountains under a pale blue sky. But by the second day, when he reaches the Red Vein Stone at sunset, the footage becomes different. His camera, unedited and time-stamped, captures the humming. At first it's barely audible, but it increases as he approaches the triangle carving. "It's not wind," he says softly into the mic. "It's deeper. It's coming from below." Then the camera shakes slightly as he leans into the narrow crevice. He stops, breathes, and says, "All right, going in." For the next 3 minutes, we see little more than stone walls and faint reflections from his flashlight. The passage is tighter than expected. He turns sideways to squeeze through, brushing against rough rock. Then, suddenly, it opens into a small chamber. Dust particles float in the beam of his light. The walls are smooth, unnaturally smooth. Ryan gasps, not out of fear but awe. "This isn't a mine," he whispers. "It's carved." In one corner of the chamber, a faint metallic shimmer catches the light. He kneels, brushes the surface, and the humming rises again. But now it has rhythm. A pulse. The sound of a heartbeat, not his own. His breathing becomes heavier. The handheld camera pans across a set of symbols etched into the far wall. Arrows, circles, jagged lines intersecting at odd angles. Then the image shakes. Ryan stumbles backward. He whispers something inaudible, his hand trembling. He turns the camera to face himself. His eyes are wide. "I don't think I'm alone down here," he says. "I heard something behind me, but when I turned, nothing. And I can't tell where the sound is coming from. It's like it's inside me." He tries to exit the chamber. That's when the final 60 seconds begin. The video quality degrades slightly, flickering. A sharp cracking sound is heard, followed by a low groan, as if stone is shifting under immense pressure. Ryan yells. The light swings wildly. Dust clouds the lens. "I'm getting out," he says, panting. "I'm getting out now." And then, just before the feed cuts, a voice, whispered, layered, hard to distinguish, seems to say, "You opened it." The screen goes black. That was the last anyone ever saw of Ryan Kelso. His satellite phone pinged one final signal from the base of the mountain. Search teams found his campsite, but not him. His gear, his food, his notebooks, all there, but no trace of Ryan himself. And the chamber? No one could find it, not even with his footage. The angles shifted, landmarks didn't match. It was as if the mountain had closed again. In the next part, we'll explore what happened to those who watched that video, and how some claimed it changed more than their beliefs. It changed their minds. Ryan Kelso's video, titled "Inside the Lost Dutchman's Mine Uncut Footage," was never officially uploaded. But a partial version, just under 12 minutes, leaked onto a private torrent tracker 2 weeks after his disappearance. No one knows who posted it. The file was stripped of metadata, the username a string of meaningless characters. Yet it spread rapidly among niche internet communities obsessed with unsolved mysteries, lost treasure, and the supernatural. At first, most assumed it was a hoax. Too polished. too cinematic. But a few details made skeptics pause. The sound of the humming, the dust in the light, and most notably, Ryan's face. It didn't look like acting. His panic was too real. His sweat, his breath, the tremble in his voice. It struck a nerve in people. Comments began to fill forums. I watched it, and now I can't sleep. There's something wrong with the audio. It messes with your head. My ears started ringing at 8:02. What's that sound? Over time, viewers began to report strange symptoms after watching. Insomnia. Vivid dreams of dark tunnels. Auditory hallucinations, most notably, a low-frequency hum heard at night, even with devices off. One user claimed his ceiling fan began rotating counterclockwise after viewing the clip, despite being turned off. Another posted screenshots of a triangle of arrows that had appeared in the frost on his window. The video was pulled from nearly every platform within a month. Not by government order, but seemingly because no host wanted responsibility. It kept returning though. Re-uploaded, renamed, edited into reaction compilations and breakdowns. Eventually, the clip reached a podcaster named Ben Richter. He hosted Desert Myths, a weekly series exploring unsolved mysteries of the American West. Ben was a rationalist. He liked stories, but didn't buy into them. When he received the video via an anonymous email with the subject line "Do not listen at night," he laughed it off. He watched it live on a stream. His audience watched with him, nearly 9,000 people. He commented on Ryan's breath, the rock carvings, even made jokes about the heartbeat hum. But halfway through the video, Ben went quiet. His brow furrowed, his head tilted. "Do you guys hear that?" he asked. The chat filled with comments. "Yes. WTF is that? Make it stop." Then Ben leaned forward, took off his headphones and said, "I think I need to." The feed cut. That episode was never finished. Hours later, Ben posted a short audio-only message to his subscribers. "I'm okay. Just taking a break." He never uploaded again. His social media accounts went dark. A year later, he resurfaced under a different name, running a wellness retreat in Oregon, specializing in silence therapy. When contacted, he refused to discuss the video. Said he didn't even own a computer anymore. Those who downloaded the full version of the clip, what's sometimes called Kelso 12, formed their own online circles. Some tried to analyze the audio spectrum, claiming hidden frequencies embedded within. Others tracked Ryan's last GPS pings, trying to reconstruct his path using terrain matching software. But no two maps matched. The more people searched, the less sense the mountain seemed to make. As if the footage wasn't showing a real place, but a window into something shifting, something alive. One researcher even suggested that the chamber Ryan entered didn't exist in physical space. That it was a construct triggered by belief, proximity, and maybe, just maybe, by intention. In the next part, we'll meet the only person known to have returned from the area after watching the full Kelso video. He didn't bring back gold, but he brought back something else. Something carved into his skin. His name was Marcus Dell. A 42-year-old paramedic from Albuquerque, he was known among his friends as quiet, skeptical, and deeply logical. He didn't drink, didn't believe in ghosts, and had little patience for conspiracy theories. But he had one obsession: decoding visual data. It began as a hobby, analyzing UFO videos, frame by frame, debunking fake footage in online forums. When someone sent him the full Kelso 12 video on a USB drive in 2006, he almost deleted it without watching. But curiosity won. He watched it once. Then again. then 17 times in 3 days. He catalogued every camera angle, sound distortion, dust pattern, and flashlight flicker. He noticed things no one else had. At timestamp 7:49, when Kelso turns abruptly, the camera briefly catches a reflection not from his own light, but from deeper in the tunnel, faint and orange. At 9:12, when the humming grows louder, Ryan's pupils dilate more than the surrounding light would explain. Marcus believed something was happening neurologically. "It's a resonance event," he wrote on a private blog. "Not a sound, but an invitation." By the 4th night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He kept hearing the hum. Low, steady, inside his skull. Not painful, almost calming, like a presence he couldn't describe. He began drawing sketches of symbols, shapes, and unfamiliar landscapes. The triangle of arrows appeared everywhere, sometimes forming a spiral, other times floating above a jagged canyon. He felt compelled to go. In March 2006, Marcus left work, told no one, and drove west. He brought with him only basic hiking gear, a notepad, and a compact camera. 3 days later, park rangers found his vehicle at the base of the Superstitions, locked, with the keys inside. His bag was missing. His phone was never used again. He returned 5 days later, barefoot and sunburned, stumbling into a ranger station at dawn. He was dehydrated, weak, and confused, but otherwise unharmed. When asked where he'd been, he gave no clear answer. He said he had followed the hum, and that it had led him through. Doctors assumed heatstroke, but when they examined his chest during intake, they found something unusual. Just above his sternum, 3 faint scars had formed. Not scratches, not burns, but perfect shallow impressions. 3 arrows, forming a triangle, no larger than a silver dollar. He said he didn't remember how they got there. Over the next few weeks, Marcus was held for observation. He underwent psychiatric evaluations, neurological tests, even sleep studies. Nothing was abnormal, except for his dreams. He described long tunnels lit by gold dust, humming walls, and a voice that spoke in pulses. "It doesn't speak in words," he told a psychologist. "It shows." When released, he disappeared from public life. He moved to a small cabin in northern Arizona, disconnected from the internet, and refused interviews. But he left behind one message, written in pen on the back page of his journal, now archived by a researcher named Dana Wu. "It's not a mine. It's a memory. And every time someone finds it, it remembers them too." In the next part, we'll turn to Dana herself, a folklorist who didn't believe in the curse, until the mountain answered her research with something far too personal to ignore. Dana Wu didn't grow up believing in haunted places or cursed treasures. Her world was built on stories, structured, sourced, and studied. As a professor of folklore and cultural anthropology, she spent most of her time analyzing how myths evolved through oral traditions. She had dissected hundreds of legends, from the Wendigo in northern Canada to the ghost roads of rural Japan. To her, the lost Dutchman's mine was just another tale, rich in imagery, but ultimately a product of frontier imagination. She only began studying it academically in 2011, after a student submitted a paper on the Kelso video and its cultural impact. Dana wasn't impressed at first. The idea that a mine could remember, or that people were being driven mad by a humming stone, seemed absurd. But what did catch her interest was the consistency. Over nearly 150 years, from Jacob Waltz to Marcus Dell, the imagery stayed the same. The triangle of arrows, the pulsing sound, the sensation of being watched from within the mountain. Legends don't usually keep that level of detail. They drift, change with time, adopt new metaphors, but this one held firm. That was rare. Intrigued, Dana compiled over 400 pages of reports, interviews, expedition logs, and field sketches, tracing every known sighting or incident linked to the superstitions. She noticed strange overlaps, people who'd never met describing the same symbols in the same places, decades apart. In 2013, she took a sabbatical to visit Arizona. It was meant to be observational only. Photographs, topography, a few location cross-checks. She didn't plan to hike deep into the superstitions, but plans change. A local historian gave her directions to what he called the Weeping Rock, and that phrase alone, so similar to the bleeding stone from earlier reports, was enough to change her mind. She set out at sunrise, accompanied only by a field recorder and a GPS tracker. The trail was uneventful. Lizards darted across her path. The wind whispered through the canyons. But as she approached the marker on her map, something shifted. The air thickened. Her ears began to ring. Not loudly, but enough to notice. She arrived at the site by mid-afternoon. A narrow rock spire with a vertical red streak. It wasn't bleeding, of course. It was just iron oxide. But the color was striking. She activated her recorder and began describing the scene. Then she froze. A low hum had begun, faint but distinct. She spun around. No aircraft. No machines. Just wind. And the hum. She held up the recorder, documenting every second. "It's real," she whispered. "The sound is real." That evening, she returned to her motel and played back the recording. The audio was clear. But at the 7-minute mark, the frequency shifted, and embedded within the hum, she heard something else. Not words. Not music. But a pattern. A sequence. It repeated 5 times, like a beacon. She analyzed the waveform and discovered it resembled a fragment of early indigenous flute notation, specifically, a pattern used in Apache morning songs. This startled her. There was no reason for that sequence to be present unless someone had embedded it intentionally. And if it was embedded, who or what had placed it inside a sound supposedly emitted by the mountain itself? That night, she dreamed of a corridor lined with sandstone. At the end stood a stone gate, marked by 3 arrows. Behind it, not darkness, but a warm, pulsing light. She awoke with tears in her eyes and no explanation why. Over the next week, she tried returning to the location, but every time, her GPS glitched. The coordinates led to empty brush, or sheer cliff faces. It was as if the stone had vanished. Dana left Arizona with more questions than answers, but she added one sentence to the final page of her research notes. Some stories stay alive because they are fed. In the next part, we'll explore the strangest theory of all, that the lost Dutchman's mine was never a place to be discovered, but a place that chooses who may enter. The theory emerged slowly, whispered between lines of academic forums, late-night radio shows, and encrypted Discord servers dedicated to what some now called the superstition signal. It wasn't popular. In fact, most dismissed it outright as pseudo-mysticism layered onto a regional legend. But a handful of researchers, folklorists, and even physicists began to consider it seriously. What if the lost Dutchman's mine wasn't fixed to a location in space, but rather in perception? The idea wasn't without precedent. Across cultures, stories existed of places that appeared only to certain people, or at certain times. Hidden valleys, ghost roads, castles that emerged in fog and vanished at dawn. The Celts called them thin places, spots where the veil between worlds grew weak. Could the mine be something similar? Not a mine, but a threshold. One of the first to publish this line of thought was Dr. Nikhil Ray, a theoretical physicist who specialized in quantum locality. He wasn't interested in treasure. He was interested in frequencies. In 2015, after reading Dana Wu's field notes and analyzing Ryan Kelso's audio track, he noticed an unusual interference pattern within the hum. When converted into spectrogram data, the frequency range behaved oddly. It wasn't flat, like wind or natural vibration. It oscillated in recursive loops, patterns within patterns. Nikhil wrote, "The signal doesn't just transmit, it responds. like sonar, waiting for recognition. He speculated that the hum functioned as a kind of neural handshake, a test to see who could perceive a specific layer of reality. Those who passed felt drawn in. Those who couldn't, the mountain ignored them. More intriguing was the concept that the mind moves, not geographically, but experientially. Different seekers reported finding the chamber in slightly different places. GPS logs overlapped, but never matched exactly. Landmarks seen in videos didn't align with maps. As if the mind rearranged its approach, presenting itself only when certain inner conditions were met: intention, belief, resonance. This resonated with a woman named Coral Lane, a Navajo linguist who had grown up hearing stories of a sleeping place in the superstitions. According to her grandmother, there was a place that, quote, only listened to the hearts of walkers. If someone entered with greed, the mountain would close. If someone entered with mourning, it might show the way. Coral contacted Dana Wu and shared a story passed down by her great-grandmother, a girl who vanished for 3 days in the canyons and returned speaking in verse, claiming to have heard the stones sing. She drew the triangle symbol in ash and said, "It isn't gold that's hidden. It's a memory too heavy for one mind." Around the same time, an anonymous contributor posted a theory to an underground archive, suggesting that the mine was a kind of archive itself, an ancient construct meant to preserve something not meant to be touched. The gold was incidental, a lure. What mattered was the structure, the chamber, the hum. In this theory, every person who entered and disappeared had in some way fed the memory of the place, added something to it, become part of its echo. As the legend grew, so did the mine's reach. It needed seekers, not to reveal treasure, but to sustain its pattern. That same year, a shortwave radio operator in Nevada claimed to have picked up a pulsing sequence, identical to the hum heard in Kelso's video. But his signal came not from Arizona, but from Colorado, hundreds of miles away. Could the mine be more than one place, or was the mountain only one of its faces? In the next part, we'll follow a man who refused to believe in any of this, until the superstitions brought him something no skeptic could explain. A relic from someone who should have been lost forever. For most of his life, Graham Wells didn't believe in anything he couldn't hold in his hand. As a retired Air Force technician and later a mechanical engineer, his world was one of schematics, torque specifications, and electromagnetic tolerances. He prided himself on precision. When people talked about the lost Dutchman's mine, he rolled his eyes. "If it existed," he often said, "we'd have bulldozed it and built a parking lot by now." He lived just outside of Mesa, Arizona, not far from the edge of the Superstition Mountains. It wasn't the legend that drew him to the region. It was the climate. Dry, quiet, predictable. For a man who had spent his career listening to the irregular heartbeat of failing engines, Arizona's stillness was a kind of therapy. That changed in the spring of 2017. Graham had been hiking a familiar trail near Peralta Canyon, an area he'd visited dozens of times, when he spotted something strange tucked into a crevice beneath a sandstone overhang. At first he thought it was trash, left behind by careless campers. But when he pulled it free, his breath caught. It was a leather-bound notebook. Weathered, water-stained, and cracked at the spine, but still intact. He flipped it open. The first page was a map, rough, hand-drawn, but detailed. The second page contained a name. Ryan Kelso. Graham froze. He'd heard the name before, years ago, when his niece, an online mystery enthusiast, had shown him the infamous video. He had dismissed it then as digital storytelling, fabricated for clicks. But the notebook was real. And inside, Kelso's handwriting described locations, bearings, and detailed accounts of his journey. Most chilling of all, a final entry dated 2 days after his supposed disappearance. In that entry, Ryan described waking up inside a stone chamber, unable to remember how he got there. He wrote of walls that pulsed faintly, and a lightless passage that seemed to breathe. The last line read, "It knows I see it now, and it's letting me leave." Graham brought the notebook home, scanned every page, and ran tests on the leather. Everything suggested authenticity. The ink had not been freshly applied. The paper fibers were consistent with early 2000s manufacturing. And the GPS coordinates mentioned inside matched the general region near Weaver's Needle, but not the exact path Kelso had taken. Graham kept this to himself for months, unsure what to do. Then one evening, while reviewing the scans, he noticed something strange. Embedded faintly in the margins of several pages were tiny indentations. Marks not made by pen, but by pressure. He enhanced the images and realized they formed symbols. Tiny triangles, arranged like a compass. Each page's marks pointed in different directions. He followed the first one. It led him to a section of the mountain he had never visited, despite his years of hiking. There, nestled between two tall boulders, he found a narrow recess. Inside, buried beneath loose sand, was a strip of cloth. Black, synthetic, torn. On its corner in faded ink were the letters RK. It matched the tag from a jacket Ryan had worn in his last video. The realization hit him like a punch. Ryan Kelso hadn't vanished entirely. Parts of him had come back. Or had been let go. Graham didn't tell anyone at first. But he began to return to the mountains more often, following the symbols, decoding the margins. The notebook wasn't just a journal, it was a guide. But not a guide to treasure, to something older, something hidden beneath layers of space, memory, and silence. And as he went deeper, Graham began hearing the hum. It started faintly, just beneath the sound of wind, but grew clearer with each trip. He never found gold. But he stopped doubting. In the next part, we'll return to the origins of the legend, to the man who started it all, Jacob Waltz, and explore whether he ever truly escaped the mine or whether a part of him was left behind, echoing through the stone. Jacob Waltz is a name wrapped in fog. Some say he was a liar. Others believe he found something so valuable and so cursed that he spent the final years of his life trying to forget it. What we know for certain is this. He arrived in Arizona Territory sometime in the 1860s, a German immigrant with mining experience, few possessions, and a tendency toward isolation. People called him the Dutchman, though he wasn't Dutch at all. He spoke with a thick accent, kept mostly to himself, and lived in a small adobe house near Phoenix. For decades, rumors swirled around him. He would vanish into the desert for weeks, then return with pockets heavy and a smirk he wouldn't explain. Witnesses claimed he once paid for a meal with a gold nugget the size of a walnut. Others said he visited a local blacksmith to have a piece of quartz melted down, quartz veined with pure gold. But when asked where he found it, he'd simply wave a hand toward the superstitions and mutter, "Too far, too hard." Near the end of his life, Waltz fell ill. He was taken in by Julia Thomas, a baker's assistant who cared for him in his final weeks. On his deathbed in 1891, he reportedly gave her a crude map and a series of instructions, landmarks, distances, warnings. The story goes that he said, "The mine is real, but don't go looking for it. You'll wish you hadn't." Julia did not listen. After his death, she organized a small expedition with two friends, hoping to find the mine. They failed. Every subsequent search led to more confusion. The terrain didn't match Waltz's descriptions. Water sources were gone, rock formations unrecognizable. Some believed the map was fake. Others claimed he had deliberately altered it to keep the location secret. But then something strange happened. In 1895, a letter surfaced, supposedly written by Waltz but never sent. It was addressed to a man named Heinrich Groll, a fellow German he had briefly worked with in the late 1870s. The letter spoke of a hole in the stone and a place where the earth sings in the bones. Most interestingly, it contained a small sketch, 3 arrows forming a triangle. The same symbol later seen by Helen Pierce, Ryan Kelso, and others. If authentic, this would place the symbol's use decades earlier than anyone believed. The letter vanished into a private collection, but not before a historian transcribed its contents. The translated text ended with this line: "It is not a mine. It is a remembering place. The deeper I went, the more it knew me." What did Waltz find? Was it gold he carried out, or something he couldn't name? Some researchers believe Waltz stumbled into a natural geologic anomaly, an underground chamber resonating at specific frequencies, causing hallucinations and distorted perceptions. Others are less rational. They argue that Waltz made a bargain, that he found something old and aware, and that in exchange for gold he gave it something else, a piece of himself. His final years were marked by paranoia. Neighbors described him standing outside at night staring toward the mountain. He built no family, left no heirs. Just rumors, a crude map, and warnings few took seriously. What if he wasn't trying to protect a treasure but trying to stop people from waking something that never sleeps? In the next part, we'll investigate the gold itself, its strange purity, its unclear origin, and how a single nugget tested by modern labs revealed chemical signatures that shouldn't exist in any mine in North America. Gold in its purest form is chemically simple. Atomic number 79. A soft metal resistant to corrosion, eternally gleaming. But gold from the lost Dutchman legend has always been described as something else. Denser, darker, unusually heavy even for its kind. And while most dismissed this as the exaggeration of folklore, one sample may have proven there was truth hidden in the shine. In 1962, a small, unnamed private collector in Santa Fe sent a gold nugget to a geochemical lab in Denver. It came with no explanation, only a typed label: Arizona, 1889, origin uncertain. The nugget was roughly the size of a chestnut, visibly threaded with white quartz, but what caught the lab's attention wasn't its size. It was the readings. Standard mass spectrometry tests revealed an extraordinary purity level: 99.92% elemental gold. That level, while not impossible, was rare in nature. But what disturbed the technicians was the trace elements found in the remaining 0.08%. Isotopes of osmium and tellurium in ratios never before documented in North American geology. Some of the readings matched signatures found only in deep mantle extractions, materials typically unreachable except through intense high-pressure tectonic movement. This puzzled the lab team. When they contacted the collector for more context, they received no reply. A follow-up letter returned unopened. The sample was eventually shelved, labeled unverified, and forgotten for decades. That is, until 1997, when Dr. Helena March, a metallurgist studying anomalous mineral compositions, stumbled upon the report while cataloging old lab files. She was intrigued. She tracked down the sample, still sealed, still intact. With modern tools, she ran another battery of tests: X-ray diffraction, laser ablation, thermal conductivity measurements. What she found astonished her. Not only was the purity unchanged, but the internal crystalline structure of the gold was misaligned, suggesting that the metal had been exposed to extremely high-frequency vibration after formation. Essentially, the gold had been tuned. This was not a naturally occurring effect. It would have required controlled sonic energy at sustained exposure, something no known natural process could accomplish, especially not inside an abandoned mountain range in Arizona. Dr. March presented her findings at a small geology conference in Utah. Most attendees dismissed it as lab error or a hoax, but a few took interest, including a historian familiar with the lost Dutchman legend. He mentioned that early accounts described the mine's gold as singing in the pan, a phrase previously interpreted as poetic metaphor. But what if it was literal? What if the gold didn't just exist, it resonated? Dr. March became quietly obsessed. She attempted to locate the original collector, but found no record matching the name used on the label. When she published her findings anonymously on an early internet forum for fringe science, she received an email a week later. No name, no greeting, just a single sentence. The stone remembers who takes from it. Disturbed, she deleted her post. But the idea lingered. In 2003, she conducted an unauthorized experiment, placing the nugget inside an anechoic chamber and recording its vibrational output over time. For the first 2 days, nothing happened. Then, on the third night, her instruments picked up a low hum, barely detectable, like a faint breath from the metal itself. She played it back. The frequency matched a narrow band within the Kelso video hum. She double-checked. It wasn't an error. Somehow, this piece of gold was emitting a pattern known to be associated with disappearances, hallucinations, and the mine itself. She removed the sample from the chamber and locked it away. 2 weeks later, she left her lab position and moved to a cabin in Nevada, where she lives to this day. Occasionally, she writes under a pseudonym, warning researchers to leave the superstitions alone. Her final note, found in the margins of a published metallurgy paper, reads, "It's not the gold that's cursed, it's what it came from." In the next part, we'll look at a decades-old military report quietly declassified, revealing that the US Army once tried to map the Superstition Mountains, and why they abruptly stopped all operations after one night of seismic monitoring went terribly wrong. In the fall of 1954, during the height of Cold War paranoia, the US Army Corps of Engineers quietly began an initiative known internally as Operation Raft Aspire. Its stated purpose was benign: to map mineral-rich regions of the American Southwest for potential resource development. But according to a recently declassified report, buried deep within the National Archives, a secondary, undisclosed directive accompanied the mission: to investigate unusual magnetic fluctuations reported by aerial surveys in and around the Superstition Mountains. A series of reconnaissance flights had picked up strange interference, momentary disruptions in radar systems, and unexplainable compass anomalies. Though initially dismissed as equipment error, the consistency of the disturbances warranted deeper investigation. In November of that year, a 4-man engineering team was deployed to a remote section of the Superstitions, equipped with seismic readers, magnetometers, and radio triangulation gear. The site selected was just east of Weaver's Needle, a location known in folklore but considered geologically stable and unremarkable. What happened next was documented in a series of terse, heavily redacted field memos. The first 48 hours were uneventful. Equipment readings were nominal, and weather conditions remained clear. The men, Lieutenant Harold Franks, Sergeant Benjamin Leary, Corporal Walter Nyers, and Technician Glenn Moravec, established a base camp and began grid mapping the terrain. On the third night, at approximately 0200 hours, seismic sensors began to pick up rhythmic pulses emanating from below the bedrock. These pulses were too regular to be natural tremors, and too slow to match any known machinery. At first, the team assumed it was an error, faulty calibration, or echo feedback, but the pulses grew louder, triggering audible harmonics within the radio equipment. Sergeant Leary reported hearing a low vibration that felt like it was crawling up through the soles of his boots. Technician Moravec, who was monitoring the seismic feed inside the command tent, described the vibration as, quote, "a breathing rhythm, slow and deep, as if the earth were alive." The data was logged and transmitted to the nearest military relay station. Within hours, an order came through: pack up immediately, cease all recordings, and destroy on-site notes. But by then, one of the men, Corporal Nyers, was already missing. His boots and jacket were found 20 yards from the tent, but there were no tracks leading away, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just his gear, neatly arranged, and his sidearm untouched. The remaining team scoured the area until dawn. At 06:00 they abandoned the site. Officially, the operation was labeled as, quote, concluded due to weather instability, despite clear skies being documented in civilian reports for that entire week. The most revealing note, handwritten in the margin of Lieutenant Franks's final field log, reads, "It came from below, and it watched us through the stone." The men were debriefed under classified conditions. Franks resigned from the military a month later. Leary never spoke of the incident again. Moravec years later would tell a friend in confidence that he sometimes still heard the pulses, when everything else was silent. The equipment they'd used was supposedly destroyed, but fragments of it, scratched with strange markings, were found in a surplus auction in 1989, and acquired by a collector of military oddities. These included a cracked seismic plate, etched with a pattern of 3 small arrows converging into a triangle. When the collector posted the image online in 2007, it drew the attention of treasure forums, sparking debate over whether the military had come closer to the mine than anyone before, or whether they'd merely disturbed something better left buried. In the next part, we'll examine a phenomenon reported only by night hikers: incidents of disorientation, time loss, and recurring dreams, connected to a shadowed past known only by its whispered name, the Hourglass Path. They call it the Hourglass Path. It's not listed on any official map, nor marked by trailheads or signposts. Its name comes from the terrain itself, a narrow corridor formed by 2 leaning rock faces, pinching together like the center of an hourglass, then widening again into the open desert. It lies just east of a dry wash near the base of Bluff Ridge, far off the marked hiking routes in the Superstition Mountains. Most locals avoid it. Those who've passed through it, especially at night, report strange symptoms: spatial disorientation, time gaps, vivid dreams, and in some cases, total memory loss. The stories stretch back decades, but the most well-documented accounts surfaced in 1981, when a young geology student named Marla Pennington attempted a solo survey of lesser-known mineral veins in the area. Her logbook was meticulous. On October 17th, she wrote of discovering an unusual wind channel that didn't match the topography. On the 18th, she found the path. "It's too narrow to be natural," she wrote. "Feels like it was carved by something, or for something." That night, she set up camp nearby. Her last entry reads simply, "Going through at moonrise, just to see." She didn't return. A search party was dispatched 3 days later, guided by her GPS transmitter, which went dead just beyond the pass. Her tent was found intact. Food untouched. No signs of struggle, but inside the tent was a notebook. A different one, not the field log she'd carried. The handwriting inside didn't match hers. It was older, faded, and written in German. Most of it was indecipherable, but one phrase repeated several times: "Sie will dich sehen, wenn du allein bist." Translated, "She wants to see you when you are alone." For years, Pennington was presumed dead, until 1993, when a hiker named Russ Caro claimed to have seen a woman matching her description on the opposite side of the mountains. She was walking alone at dusk, barefoot, her clothes tattered, and her eyes distant. When he called out to her, she looked at him, then turned and walked behind a boulder. He followed. No one was there. Investigators dismissed it as mistaken identity. But that same week, someone anonymously mailed Pennington's original field log to the university where she studied. It had been missing for 12 years. The envelope had no return address, no fingerprints, and bore a Superstition Mountain postmark with no corresponding drop location. Inside, scrawled on the back page in unfamiliar handwriting, were 4 words: "Not lost, just elsewhere." Since then, the Hourglass Path has become a kind of forbidden pilgrimage for a certain type of seeker, those drawn not by treasure, but by something harder to name. Many report auditory hallucinations near the center of the pass, voices in a language they don't speak, echoing footsteps, or faint weeping from the stone. Electronics malfunction regularly. Watches stop. Digital compasses spin. One experienced hiker claimed he walked through the corridor in less than 5 minutes, only to find his phone said 97 minutes had passed. When he tried to retrace his route, the path had vanished behind him, just smooth stone and mesquite. Scientists who've studied the area describe unusual magnetic distortions and subsurface anomalies that don't align with known fault lines or mineral concentrations. Yet none have explained why the phenomena only occur after sundown, or why those who enter alone are more likely to experience them. Some say the hourglass isn't just a path, it's a filter. A passageway that watches, that chooses, and sometimes keeps. In the next part, we'll examine a long-lost journal, written in 1910, by a man who claimed to have mapped the mine itself, but whose expedition ended with the sudden disappearance of 2 members, and a drawing that shows a door carved in stone, opening into blackness that seems to move. In the early spring of 1910, a retired railroad surveyor named Elijah Brandt set out into the Superstition Mountains with a singular purpose: to chart what he believed was the true route to the lost Dutchman's mine. Unlike gold-hungry prospectors before him, Brandt approached the mystery with a cartographer's mind and a scientist's restraint. He wasn't interested in rumors or ghost stories. He wanted topography, alignment, and proof. His journals, thought to be lost for over a century, resurfaced in 2002 during the demolition of a condemned farmhouse in southern Utah. Packed in a weathered trunk beneath the floorboards, they were remarkably well preserved. The entries are methodical, describing landscape features, rock formations, changes in elevation, and occasional notations about odd acoustic reflections, places where footsteps echoed too long, or the wind seemed to fold in on itself. But toward the end of the second volume, the tone of the writing shifts. The change begins after his group, Brandt and 2 companions, Jeremiah Holt and Ephraim Nash, camped near a cluster of basalt pillars Brandt referred to as the organ teeth. According to the journal, Brandt discovered a peculiar alignment. When standing between 2 of the pillars at sunrise, the light fell through them and illuminated a specific point on the canyon wall, revealing a square outline, too geometric for nature. They reached the location later that day. There, behind a tangle of brush and sun-baked vines, they found it. A recessed stone door, 10 feet tall, with a carved relief at its center. 3 arrows, forming a triangle, pointing inward. Brandt drew it in the journal. The carving is precise and disturbing. The triangle isn't just a symbol, it appears layered, as if suggesting depth, like a funnel spiraling inward. The men camped nearby and agreed to enter at dawn. That night, Holt complained of headaches and nausea. Nash said he heard whispers near the rock. Brandt tried to remain objective, but his writing betrays unease. He mentions a vibration in the bones, like standing too close to an engine, and the sense that the canyon was holding its breath. The next morning, they pried the stone open using a system of ropes and leverage. What lay behind was not a mine shaft or tunnel, but a sloped passage descending at an unnatural angle. Brandt described it as a throat in the earth. The walls were smooth, almost glass-like, and carried a faint warmth. The 3 descended together, lanterns held high. At approximately 20 paces in, Holt suddenly stopped. He stared at a patch of wall and whispered, "There's something looking at us." Brandt swung his lantern around. Nothing. But Holt wouldn't move. He began backing out slowly, eyes fixed on the wall. Nash went to guide him, but at that moment, a low hum began to rise, deep and pulsing, vibrating the lantern glass. Brandt wrote, "It wasn't sound, it was something behind the sound, like breath before a voice." Panic set in. The 3 retreated, but when they emerged into daylight, Nash was gone, simply vanished. Holt was in a daze, sweating and murmuring something about the mouth closing. Brandt searched the passage for hours, calling Nash's name, but found no trace. Only a handprint, burned black into the wall. Holt refused to speak after that. He returned to town within the week, changed and silent. Brandt remained in the desert trying to sketch what he'd seen, but his drawings became increasingly abstract, spirals, loops, and triangular mazes that made little geometric sense. His final journal entry reads, "The mine is not a place but a question, and every man who finds it becomes part of the answer." The journals were analyzed by handwriting experts and historians, and their authenticity remains undisputed. Today, Brandt's drawing of the stone door hangs in a small private museum near Globe, Arizona. It is labeled simply, "Entrance, Unknown Origin." In the next part, we'll follow the trail of Ephraim Nash, the man who disappeared, because decades later, in a cave hundreds of miles from the superstitions, a bone fragment was found etched with his initials, and something far stranger carved beneath them, a pattern no one alive should have known. Ephraim Nash's disappearance in 1910 became just another whispered thread in the fabric of Superstition Mountain folklore, one more name on a long list of those who vanished without trace. For nearly a century, he was presumed dead, buried in rock fall, or lost in the unforgiving terrain. But in the summer of 1984, a discovery was made in the sandstone caves near Carlsbad, New Mexico, more than 300 miles east of the superstitions, that would raise chilling questions about whether Nash ever truly died at all. A group of spelunkers from a university geological club had entered a rarely visited cave network colloquially known as the Hollows. It was a challenging descent, narrow passageways, abrupt drop-offs, and oxygen-depleted chambers. While navigating a tunnel known as the Chimney, one of the students slipped and discovered a narrow cavity hidden behind a cluster of loose shale. Inside was a shallow pocket, just large enough for a man to crawl into. And inside that pocket was a bone, a single human femur, partially fossilized, but with two unmistakable features. The first was a crude carving. 3 letters etched into the surface in an uneven hand. E.N. The second was far stranger. Beneath the initials, carved with more precision and care, was a symbol. 3 arrows arranged in a triangle, the same emblem connected to Jacob Waltz, Helen Pierce, Ryan Kelso, and all who had come near the lost Dutchman's mine. The team reported the finding to local authorities. The bone was extracted, examined, and eventually turned over to a forensic anthropologist named Dr. Martin Kells, who had spent years cataloging anomalous human remains. His analysis confirmed that the bone belonged to a Caucasian male, approximately 35 to 45 years old at time of death, and at least 70 years old, placing his death squarely within the correct window for Ephraim Nash. But the carbon dating results were inconsistent. Part of the bone showed natural degradation typical of long-term exposure to arid air. Another section, the area closest to the symbol, was unnaturally preserved, as if it had been sealed away from time. The mineral deposits around the carving were decades younger than the rest of the bone. It was as if the mark had been made recently. Even more troubling were the micro-scratches surrounding the triangle symbol. They weren't random. When enhanced under microscopy, they formed a fine spiral, barely visible, but mathematically perfect. The spiral's ratio was consistent with logarithmic scaling, found in certain ancient petroglyphs across the American Southwest. Patterns tied to tribal warnings, not decorations. Dr. Kells documented everything, and published a short abstract, which was largely ignored by the scientific community. Too strange, too many unknowns. But the artifact itself vanished 6 months later, during routine archive relocation at the New Mexico Institute of Anthropology. The only remaining evidence is a photograph of the femur, filed away in an obscure digital archive. To this day, no one can explain how the initials of a man lost in Arizona ended up in a New Mexico cave, or how a symbol tied to a supposedly cursed mine was carved with fresh precision into aging bone. Some believe Nash didn't die in the mine, that he was taken, moved, or sent somewhere else entirely. A few researchers have proposed that the mine acts not as a burial site, but a kind of portal. not to another world in the science fiction sense, but to something more abstract, a memory space, or a non-linear corridor where time folds and identity blurs. The Nash femur remains one of the most unsettling pieces of physical evidence tied to the legend. It suggests the mine is not just reactive, but capable of influence beyond its geography. In the next part, we'll meet a modern-day search and rescue volunteer who entered the superstitions to find a missing hiker, only to emerge 3 days later with no memory of where he'd been, holding an object no one could trace, and whispering a name no one had ever told him. In 2016, a seasoned search and rescue volunteer, named Colin Reyes, responded to a routine distress call in the Superstition Wilderness. A 22-year-old hiker, named Blake Harmon, had sent out a weak emergency ping before his satellite beacon went silent. The coordinates placed him near an unmarked ridge southeast of Bluff Springs, an area known for loose shale, sudden drop-offs, and, among those familiar with the folklore, a growing reputation for disorientation and time slips. Colin had participated in over 40 search operations in the region. He was known for his calm demeanor and sharp instincts. But what happened during the Harmon search would permanently alter his life, and challenge every logical framework he had relied on for years. The team set out early on a Monday morning. Colin paired with a younger volunteer, Sarah Holt, and began sweeping the marked grid. They found Harmon's boot prints, some torn fabric, and then nothing. At approximately 3:45 p.m., Colin radioed in to report they were heading down into a canyon known as Dry Knife Hollow. After that, silence. His GPS tracker went offline, his radio signal cut to static. SAR Command assumed equipment failure. A chopper was dispatched at dawn, but no sign of Reyes or Holt was found. The next 2 days passed with growing concern. Then, on Thursday morning, 72 hours after he vanished, Colin Reyes walked alone into the base camp. Disoriented, dehydrated and barefoot, his face and arms were scratched, his backpack was missing, and he carried something wrapped tightly in a cloth. Sarah Holt, however, was not with him. He was rushed to medical care. His vitals were stable, but he couldn't explain where he'd been. According to his account, he remembered following a narrow path into a sandstone corridor he didn't recognize. He said he felt the sound before he heard it, a deep humming in his chest that intensified the farther he walked. He recalled entering a small chamber with no ceiling, just sheer walls stretching upward into darkness. Then, everything went black. When asked what happened next, he shook his head. "I woke up holding this," he said, and unwrapped the cloth. Inside was an object unlike anything anyone had seen before. It was a triangle-shaped stone, no larger than a hand, made of a dull black mineral with smooth, glassy edges. Etched into its surface were 3 interlocked arrows, and beneath them, a spiral carved so finely it was barely visible unless lit from the side. The object emitted a faint warmth to the touch. Geologists could not identify the material. It was non-metallic, non-ferrous, and showed no signs of machining, yet the etching was microscopically perfect. Infrared scans revealed tiny internal fractures, too uniform for natural formation, but too chaotic for manufactured design. Reyes was kept under observation for 3 days. In that time he spoke little, slept in irregular bursts, and repeatedly whispered a single name: Nash. When shown old photos, he pointed directly at an image of Ephraim Nash, taken in 1909. "That's him," Colin said. "He was in the corridor." Investigators were baffled. Reyes had never studied the Dutchman myth, had no knowledge of Nash or the triangle symbol, and passed multiple lie detector tests. No trace of Sarah Holt was ever found. Her gear, her prints, everything ended near the mouth of Dry Knife Hollow, the last known place Colin Reyes remembered seeing her. The stone was quietly confiscated by a federal liaison working with the Forest Service. No official record of the object exists, but a leaked photo appeared online in 2019, briefly causing a storm of speculation before being scrubbed from most platforms. In it, the triangle glows faintly under infrared, showing lines not visible to the naked eye, resembling a map. Some believe it's a topographical guide. Others think it's a memory, a snapshot burned into the mineral itself. Colin Reyes never returned to SAR work. He moved to northern Arizona, disconnected from digital life, and lives alone in a small cabin. Occasionally, hikers say they've seen him sitting near the edge of the superstitions at dusk, sketching symbols into the dirt, listening to the wind. In the next part, we'll explore the mysterious artifact once stored in a private museum, an ancient Spanish helmet said to have been found inside a sealed cavern, fused with quartz and bearing carvings of the same impossible symbol that threads through every chapter of this cursed legend. For decades, the El Cerro Heritage Museum in Tucson housed a curious object tucked away in a back room, far from its curated exhibitions of Spanish colonial relics and indigenous pottery. It was listed in the archive as Helmet Iberian ca 17th century, damaged due to mineral intrusion, and for most visitors, it was just another dusty artifact. But those who took the time to study it closely often left with more questions than answers. The helmet was discovered in 1936 by a rancher named Luis Benavides, while clearing a collapsed cave system on his property near the Superstition foothills. At the time, the cave was filled with quartz-encrusted stone and hardened mineral deposits. Luis had been following the scent of dead cattle when he stumbled into a narrow fissure just wide enough to crawl through. Inside, wedged between two blocks of calcified sandstone, was the helmet, fused almost entirely with the surrounding rock. Extraction was difficult. It took several days and a team of local workers to remove it without further damage. The helmet, clearly of Spanish design, bore all the marks of early colonial craftsmanship: flared brim, reinforced ridge, and the partial crest of a conquistador insignia. But one feature stood out even then. Etched, no, almost burned, into the left cheek plate was a symbol that had no place on a 17th century artifact. 3 arrows forming a triangle, encircling a spiral so fine it was only visible under angled light. At first, historians believed the mark was a later addition, perhaps graffiti carved by someone who'd found the object long after the Spaniard's death. But metallurgical analysis in the 1950s showed that the etching had occurred during the helmet's forging, meaning it was part of the original metalwork. No records exist of this symbol being used by any Spanish military unit, religious order, or artisan guild. And stranger still, microscopic scanning of the helmet revealed deposits of quartz, not over it, but through it, lacing the iron as though the helmet had grown inside the stone itself. That was geologically impossible. The museum kept the artifact out of public display, citing lack of provenance and its damaged condition. But it drew quiet attention from fringe historians, private collectors, and eventually, government researchers. One visitor, a professor named Alton Reeves, described the helmet in a now-deleted blog post. It's as if the mountain tried to swallow it, not erode it, incorporate it. In 1998, a private donor offered the museum $300,000 to acquire the piece. They refused. Weeks later, the museum's power grid suffered a mysterious outage. Security footage from the night is missing. The helmet was gone, no forced entry, no broken locks. Just an empty display crate and a faint smell of scorched ozone in the air. The museum never commented publicly, but internal documents later revealed that the crate had been sealed with high-strength resin and required industrial tools to open. None were found at the scene. In 2004, a blurry photo surfaced online, showing a man, identity unknown, holding what appeared to be the helmet in a private collection in Zurich. The same triangular marking was faintly visible. The image was traced to a defunct server registered in Guatemala. A week after it circulated, the original forum was shut down, and no further leads emerged. Some believe the helmet never left Arizona, that it was reclaimed, not stolen. Reabsorbed by whatever force seems to surround the mine and its growing mythology. Those who've studied the photo closely claim that the man holding the helmet wore gloves not for protection, but out of fear. Because whatever the helmet touched, it marked. Some believe the triangle is more than a symbol. It's a key, not to a location, but to a memory embedded in stone, in metal, in bone. And, each time it appears, it opens a little more. In the next part, we'll examine a Navajo carving found in a cliffside miles from the superstitions. One that predates any known European contact, yet bears the same impossible emblem, and a warning chiseled in the old tongue. The thing beneath is not dead. It remembers you. In 1977, a small team of cultural anthropologists working near Canyon de Chelly in northeastern Arizona stumbled upon a cliffside carving that would ignite years of controversy among both archaeologists and folklorists. The team, led by Dr. Marianne Tolbert, a Navajo researcher focused on pre-contact symbology, was documenting ancient petroglyphs carved along sandstone walls, many of which were known to local communities for generations. But one panel, hidden behind a collapsed alcove and obscured by desert brush, appeared to have never been recorded before. Its markings were deep, deliberate, and unlike anything else found in the area. Most striking of all was the central emblem, 3 arrows forming a perfect triangle, and within it, a fine spiral etched so precisely that the chisel marks could still be felt beneath the fingertips. This alone would have been enough to draw national attention, but what accompanied the symbol made it even more disturbing. Below the triangle, in Diné syllabary, were 7 glyphs forming a message that took days to translate. The final consensus, cross-checked by multiple fluent speakers, rendered the words as, "The thing beneath is not dead, it remembers you." For Dr. Tolbert, this was a chilling discovery, not just because of the message itself, but because the style and depth of the carving indicated it predated European contact in the region. That placed the carving's origin sometime before the 1500s, long before any documented sighting of Spanish explorers in Arizona. And yet here was a symbol that wouldn't enter recorded folklore until the 1800s, with the tale of the lost Dutchman's mine. The implications were staggering. If the triangle symbol had appeared centuries earlier in Navajo culture, or even intersected with oral traditions, then it wasn't European, nor modern. It was older. Possibly far older. Dr. Tolbert spent the next year tracing mentions of anything similar within oral history. She found fragments. Vague tales of a sleeping shape inside the Red Mountains, of a tunnel made of breath, and of a stone eye that watches from the dark. Elders spoke carefully, sometimes refusing to say more. Some would not even look at the photos of the carving. One elder, when pressed, simply said, "It is not our story. It was already here when we came." That statement haunted Dr. Tolbert more than any other. The idea that the Navajo themselves, a people with thousands of years of rich tradition, had inherited the symbol rather than created it, that was deeply unsettling. The panel itself became the center of academic dispute. Some claimed the carving was a hoax, despite no signs of modern tools or tampering. Others tried to tie it to parallel symbols in Hopi or ancestral Puebloan culture, but none matched exactly. And all attempts to date the surrounding rock through non-invasive techniques yielded ambiguous results, fluctuating between 400 and 800 years in age. Then, in 1981, the panel was damaged. A rockfall, triggered by what geologists called natural erosion, collapsed the alcove and shattered the carving. Only fragments remain. Fortunately, Dr. Tolbert had taken high-resolution rubbings and 35mm photographs, which now reside in the University of Arizona's restricted folklore archives. Her final notes, written before her death in 1999, raised questions she never got to answer. She theorized that the symbol functioned not just as a warning, but as a kind of echo, something that imprinted itself into those who came close to it, a cultural virus, passed through memory, dream, and belief. "We think the mine is hidden," she wrote, "but maybe it is not the mine that hides, maybe it is we who forget." In the next part, we'll explore the tale of a 12-year-old boy who disappeared in the superstitions in 1992 and was found 3 days later with no memory, clutching a smooth stone with the triangle symbol, and drawings of a chamber he had never seen, matching descriptions from people he could never have known. In the summer of 1992, a family from Scottsdale took a weekend camping trip into the Superstition Mountains, hoping to escape the heat and spend a few quiet days near Reeves Creek. Among them was 12-year-old Noah Callahan, an introspective, soft-spoken boy who loved astronomy and always carried a sketchpad in his backpack. According to his parents, the first day passed uneventfully, hiking, roasting marshmallows, and watching the stars. But on the second afternoon, sometime between 3 and 4 p.m., Noah vanished. One moment he was sitting on a rock, sketching the ridgeline. The next, he was gone. His parents searched frantically for over an hour before contacting authorities. Within 4 hours, a full search and rescue operation was underway. Dogs lost his scent 50 yards from camp. No drag marks, no signs of a fall, just nothing. He had disappeared into the rock and silence. For 3 days, over 70 volunteers combed the area. Helicopters circled overhead. A diver was brought in to search the creek. But there were no tracks, no clothing, no torn branches, no evidence that a child had moved through the brush at all. Then, early on the 4th morning, a ranger spotted movement near the canyon rim just above the trailhead. It was Noah. He was barefoot, clothes dirty but intact, and his hands were wrapped tightly around something. When approached, he didn't run. He simply looked up, blinked slowly, and said, "I found the place that hums." He was brought to a hospital, dehydrated and exhausted, but physically unharmed. The object he had carried back was a smooth, flat stone about the size of his palm, with a carved triangle of 3 arrows and a spiral in the center, nearly identical to the markings seen on ancient carvings, lost journals, and even the artifact held by Colin Reyes. When questioned, Noah couldn't explain where he had been. He remembered walking through a shadow that didn't have a source, and then waking in a long hallway made of soft stone. The air, he said, felt like it was singing. He spoke of lights that moved without fire, and walls that pulsed faintly, like breathing. He never saw a person, but he heard a voice, not in words, but in feelings. He described the sensation as being known by something old. The most unsettling detail came when he was given back his sketchpad. In it were several drawings made in charcoal he hadn't taken with him. The images showed a chamber carved into rock, with a high ceiling, stone arches, and a central altar with spiral patterns. Another page showed a series of tunnels with sharp turns, ending in a triangular door. None of these images matched any formation visible near their campsite. But when shown the sketches decades later, a geologist who had studied the Dutchman legend whispered, "This matches Brandt's drawing from 1910. The similarity was undeniable. But how could a child, who had never heard of Brandt, Nash, or the mine, draw something that had been lost to history for almost a century? Psychological evaluations ruled out trauma. Noah showed no signs of injury, hallucination, or mental illness. In fact, he became more focused after the incident. His grades improved, and he took a deep interest in geology and ancient languages. But he never went back to the superstitions. Even years later, when asked, he would grow pale and quiet. "It didn't want to keep me," he once said in an interview. "It just wanted me to remember it." The stone he carried was eventually lost. Disappeared during a museum review process after the family lent it to researchers. No explanation was ever given. But the sketchpad remains. and today, it sits in a sealed archive drawer at the Arizona Folklore Preservation Center, its pages studied only under supervision. Noah Callahan now works as a geophysicist. He has never spoken publicly again about those 3 days. But in a 2012 personal letter to a friend, he wrote one line that has since become infamous among those who study the legend. "We're not searching for the mine. The mine is searching for us." In the next part, we'll explore the eerie pattern that connects all known incidents. One discovered by an AI trained on centuries of data, revealing that every documented encounter aligns on a strange cycle of time, lunar position, and silence. In 2021, a research group at a private institute in Colorado developed an artificial intelligence model designed to detect patterns in folklore across global regions. Originally, the project aimed to trace shared themes in myths, floods, sky gods, trickster figures, by analyzing historical documents, oral records, and published texts in multiple languages. But one of the research assistants, a graduate student named Liam Rhodes, decided to test the system on a much narrower topic, the legend of the lost Dutchman's mine. Over the course of 2 weeks, the AI, nicknamed FolkMind, ingested thousands of data points, journal entries, newspaper clippings, satellite telemetry, regional maps, seismic data, weather logs, folklore archives, and transcribed interviews from those who had experienced strange events in the Superstition Mountains. At first, the results were chaotic. But on the 3rd week, FolkMind began to isolate certain repeating factors. The findings startled even the most skeptical members of the team. The AI concluded that 94% of all documented incidents, disappearances, sightings of the symbol, reported humming, strange dreams, or the discovery of triangle-etched artifacts, occurred within an 11-day window tied to a precise lunar phase. The days between the first quarter moon and the full moon, specifically when the moon passed directly over the longitude of the superstitions between 1 o'clock and 3 a.m. Even stranger, the system noted that nearly all initial contact events, moments, in other words, when the desert was absolutely still. Not silent by chance, but unnaturally quiet. No wind, no insects, no animals. FolkMind labeled this variable zone of zero. Cross-referencing weather and acoustic data going back to 1910, it found that every zone of zero correlated with at least one documented case of either disorientation, sighting, or psychological disturbance near the superstitions. Liam published the results privately to a network of academic colleagues. The reaction was mixed: fascination, dismissal, and in some cases, concern. One retired physicist wrote back simply, "Some frequencies wait, some only play when no one else is speaking." But FolkMind wasn't finished. As it continued passing data, it began drawing connections to other phenomena. Similar symbols found in unrelated archaeological sites across the world, including Neolithic caves in northern Spain, basalt carvings in Iran, and even stone fragments recovered from the floor of Lake Baikal. All bore variations of the triangle and spiral motif. All were associated with local legends of lost time, strange dreams, and stone that sang. The AI attempted to create a composite timeline. The graph it produced resembled a waveform, not linear history, but pulsing intervals. Times when the pattern emerged in clusters, followed by silence lasting years or even decades. The wave seemed to peak approximately every 33 years. The last major peak had been in 1989. The next, 2022. When Liam realized the implications, he revisited all recent accounts. And sure enough, there was a sudden rise in online reports from hikers, campers, and satellite anomalies centered around the Superstition Range. His final act before the project was shuttered was to map every known triangle-carved artifact on a single digital overlay. When combined, they formed a shape. Not a mine. Not a map. But something else. A structure. A layered spiral, matching the schematics of a harmonic resonator. an ancient design once used to focus sound into a single precise frequency. FolkMind stopped responding to queries soon after. The research lab was absorbed by a private contractor 3 months later. All data was locked. But Liam had saved one image, the last one the AI produced. It was titled, "The Door Is Not Closed." In the next part, we'll look at an abandoned cabin discovered deep in the mountains, where a wall was found completely covered in soot-drawn spirals, and beneath them a sentence scorched into the stone from the inside. I listened too long. In 2008, during a routine aerial survey of firebreak lines in the eastern Superstition Mountains, a ranger spotted a decaying roof jutting out from a tree-covered ravine near Iron Flat, far beyond any marked trail or known homestead. Curious, a team of 2 forest personnel hiked to the location. What they found was a small, one-room cabin, collapsed in places, half swallowed by undergrowth. The building didn't match any structures on record. It wasn't built on a foundation, but directly into the slope of the land, its back wall pressed against a curved rock face. The front was barely intact, the door frame leaning inward, the roof caved in. But what they discovered inside would later be called one of the strangest undocumented sights in Arizona's wilderness. Every interior wall was covered in soot, not just smoke-stained but purposefully blackened, uniform, as if burned with care. And drawn into that soot, using a finger or blunt stick, were hundreds of spirals. Some were tiny, others several feet across. They overlapped, tangled, and repeated with obsessive precision. In the center of the rear wall, etched so deeply into the stone that the soot could not hide it, was a single phrase burned into the rock itself. I listened too long. No signs of fire damage existed anywhere else. No charring of the wood, no ash piles, no remains of tools or furniture. And yet the soot was fresh enough to stain the fingers. The investigators took photographs, samples, and reported the find, though it was quietly passed over by state authorities due to lack of legal property records or risk to hikers. But the story spread through hushed channels. Eventually, a former folklore archivist named Renee Dahl became involved. She tracked down the ranger who had first discovered the cabin, and through careful interviews, pieced together fragments of its history. The most compelling came from an old prospector who lived in the area in the 1970s. He claimed that the cabin had once belonged to a government man, who came around asking questions about caves, stone sounds, and spirals in the rock. The man had brought no gold pans, no survey gear, only books. He stayed out there for weeks at a time, coming into town rarely, and always asking if anyone had heard the hum. One day he stopped coming back. The locals assumed he'd died or moved on.
No one ever followed.
Renee uncovered an unsent letter buried in a university archive, dated 1974, signed only with the initials EMW. It read, "I believe the sound is not just heard, it is remembered. It follows the silence, fills the cracks. The more I listen, the more it listens back. I can't tell what part of it is mine anymore." The spiral drawings, when analyzed, were found to match those found on Ephraim Nash's bone fragment, and the stone held by Noah Callahan. But the number of spirals in the cabin was unique, 317, exactly. The same number of years between the earliest recorded triangle symbol in a pre-colonial carving and the rediscovery of Nash's journal. Coincidence? Possibly. But those who visited the cabin later said they felt uneasy while inside. Lightheaded, short of breath, and one described a sensation like being inside a bell just before it rings. The soot samples contained trace elements of hematite and carbonized organic matter, but no identifiable fuel source. The cabin still stands today, unreachable except by foot or helicopter, unmarked, unclaimed, and wrapped in silence. Some call it a relic, others, a warning. In the next part, we'll explore the most recent verified encounter, an audio file, uploaded without explanation, capturing the sound of the hum in startling clarity, and the terrified voice of a woman who claims to be standing at the edge of the mine, but there's no ground, only memory. On April 19, 2022, an anonymous audio file appeared on a dark corner of the internet, a password-protected folder within a discontinued paranormal research forum, dormant for nearly a decade. The file, titled simply _echo_03_final.wave, was just over 9 minutes long. No context, no description. Just one line of metadata, captured near Needle's Eye, 3:14 a.m. Within 24 hours, the file spread across niche communities dedicated to the Superstition Mountains and unexplained phenomena. What made the recording so disturbing wasn't just what it captured, but how specific it was. The first 2 minutes are mostly ambient desert noise, a gentle breeze, the faint chirping of insects, but then, without warning, everything goes quiet, not gradually, completely. No insects, no wind. Even the low background hiss common to all field recordings drops out. Then, a low-frequency hum begins. It's hard to describe. It's not musical, but it's not mechanical either. It pulses. Rhythmic, almost biological, as if the land itself is exhaling. Listeners reported feeling pressure in their ears even when using headphones at low volume. Some described a vibration in their chest. And then, just past the 2:30 mark, a woman's voice enters, barely above a whisper, recorded close to the mic, trembling. I think I'm standing at the edge, but there's no ground, only memory. It's like the rock isn't real, like it's waiting for me to remember something. She pauses, breathing fast. There's a door, I didn't open it, it opened when I looked at it, I swear I didn't touch it. Then the hum intensifies. Faint metallic tones layer in, not music exactly, but resembling harmonic overtones. She continues, voice cracking. It's not gold, it never was. I don't think it's a mine at all, I think it's a wound. At 7:04, a sharp static-like distortion bursts through the file, the hum stops. What follows is 20 seconds of silence, deep, perfect silence, and then a final phrase from the woman. If you're hearing this, don't follow the sound. It already knows you're listening. The file ends. No clicks, no wind, nothing. Audio engineers began studying the file. Spectrum analysis revealed something strange, a narrow band of frequency modulation fluctuating around 18.98 Hz, just below the threshold of conscious hearing. It's infrasound, the same range known to trigger unease, anxiety, and even hallucinations in humans. But that band wasn't ambient. It was embedded in the voice itself, as if the woman's speech was carrying an additional, hidden signal. Attempts to trace the file's source failed. The IP address led to a server in Ontario, which hadn't been active since 2015. The voice has never been identified. But a week later, a user on another forum claimed to have visited Needle's Eye around the same date. He didn't hear the hum, but said his dog refused to move beyond a specific boulder. She started whining, he wrote, like something was pulling her bones the wrong way. Whether the file is authentic or not, its impact was immediate. Dozens of people reported hearing similar sounds during hikes. Others began experiencing sleep disturbances after listening. Some who played the file on loop claimed their compasses spun for hours afterward, even indoors. But the most disturbing report came from a technician who layered the file over seismic readings from the region. The waveform of the hum matched a micro-tremor recorded at 3:14 a.m., the same timestamp listed in the file's metadata. And that tremor wasn't local. It was felt across a 40-mile radius. In the next part we'll uncover the oldest known written reference to the triangle symbol, an obscure Spanish missionary letter from 1695 that describes a cursed shape carved into the canyon walls, and the night the rocks spoke back. In a dusty archive beneath the Archivo General de Indias in Seville, Spain, an overlooked folio dated August 1695 was rediscovered in 2013 by a doctoral student researching Jesuit missions in the New World. The letter, written in Old Castilian, was authored by Father Esteban Rivas, a missionary assigned to the northern frontier of New Spain. It was addressed to a superior in Mexico City, cataloging the conditions of several indigenous settlements near the edges of the Sonoran Desert. Most of the document was routine. Notes on crop failures, baptisms, and territorial disputes. But near the final page, Father Rivas describes a troubling encounter during his travels with a scouting party near a mountain range that rises like black teeth from the earth. Scholars now believe he was referring to what we call the Superstition Mountains. The passage reads, "We passed through a narrow canyon where the wind would not enter, and there we found shapes carved into the stone, 3 arrows, arranged in a triangle, with a curling tail inside. The guides refused to proceed further. They claimed the shape was a warning, not of men but of the mountain itself. They said the rocks remember blood." Rivas continues, "That night, we camped outside the canyon. I was awoken just past the hour of matins by a sound unlike any I have heard. Low, deep, and steady, like the organ of the cathedral, but buried far below the earth. I rose and found that none of the animals would come near the trail. Even the horses pulled against their tethers. One mule had bled from the nose." The letter concludes with a chilling observation. "There is a shape, carved not just into the stone, but into the men who look upon it. It follows them, not in steps but in dreams. I fear this place is not cursed but listening." The document had been misfiled for over 300 years, listed under agricultural correspondence. But once translated and authenticated, it became the earliest known European record of the triangle and spiral symbol, and the first written description of the hum. Even more disturbing is that Father Rivas disappeared the following year. He was last seen traveling north toward the Gila River, reportedly searching for a quote cave that speaks. His body was never recovered. The site he described remained unidentified until 2016, when a hiker found a small cave opening near Miner's Needle containing a weathered stone with 3 intersecting arrows barely visible on its face. Carbon testing of the tool marks placed the etching at over 300 years old, consistent with Rivas's account. No further carvings were found in the cave, but a strange acoustic anomaly was documented. When the cave entrance is struck lightly with a rock, it resonates for nearly 5 seconds, far longer than any other formation in the region. Acoustic engineers theorize the cave acts as a natural resonator, but the tone produced matches the same infrasound frequency later recorded in the Kelso video and the 2022 anonymous audio file. The convergence of evidence from Father Rivas's letter to modern recordings suggests that whatever is beneath the Superstition Mountains has not only endured, but actively responds to attention. In the next part, we'll follow the mysterious case of a man who tried to map the hum using satellite arrays, and how his body was found 800 miles away with a message carved into his GPS device: "You don't chart memory." Dr. Callum Healy was not a myth chaser. A data scientist and former DARPA contractor, he specialized in geospatial anomalies and signal triangulation. In 2019, after stumbling upon a research thread discussing the so-called superstition hum, he became intrigued, not by the folklore, but by the consistent appearance of low-frequency signals centered in the same rough coordinates over decades. He believed there was an explainable source, something geological, maybe seismic. He sought to chart it. Over the next 18 months, Healy designed a custom triangulation system using a network of passive sound mapping devices, sensitive enough to detect subaudible vibration and map it like sonar. With funding from a private tech group interested in natural frequency networks, he installed 6 of these devices in remote spots surrounding the Superstition Mountains, all disguised to avoid detection. Each unit sent data to a satellite uplink Healy could monitor from his mobile station in northern Arizona. The project, codenamed VeilPoint, began logging strange results within days. The hum wasn't constant. It pulsed, appearing and disappearing in rhythmic cycles, often between 2:45 and 3:20 a.m. Its shape wasn't spherical, like an echo from a central origin, but spiral, almost like it was twisting through the land in a path rather than radiating outward. Healy compiled his data obsessively. In email logs recovered later, he wrote to a colleague, "The signal is self-organizing. It's not bouncing off the mountains, it's using them." Then, in April 2021, Healy went dark. All satellite pings from his monitoring array ceased within a 17-second window. His laptop, linked to the satellite's private node, stopped sending data at precisely 3:13 a.m., a time already marked by other incidents in the mine's long history. When local rangers were contacted to check his station, they found the trailer abandoned. No sign of struggle. All his equipment left intact, powered off. The only thing missing was his field notebook and handheld GPS device. 6 days later, a farmhand in rural Idaho, over 800 miles from the superstitions, discovered a man's body half buried near the edge of an irrigation canal. It was Healy. There were no signs of trauma, dehydration, or exposure. His body temperature was low, but there were no injuries. In his hands, clutched tightly, was his GPS device. On the back of the device, someone, or something, had carved a message with surgical precision: "You don't chart memory." The GPS had no logged coordinates between Arizona and Idaho. Its last recorded location was just outside Needle Canyon, but inside the device's software, a single custom map file remained. When opened, it displayed a three-dimensional spiral, one that mirrored the resonance maps from the anonymous Kelso video and the 2022 audio hum analysis. But this spiral was layered. At its center was a black triangle. Healy had tried to locate the hum by treating it like a place, but all the data pointed to something stranger. The hum wasn't coming from the land. It was embedded in the land's memory, a repeating signal not bound to physical space but to presence. Investigators ruled his death unexplained natural causes. The GPS was turned over to federal authorities and has not resurfaced since. His case became just another in a long chain of unexplained events surrounding the Superstition Mountains. But for those who followed his work, one thing became clear. The closer you try to map it, the less the land behaves like land at all. In the next part, we'll return to the forgotten recordings of a late-night radio host who claimed he once broadcast from within the mine, and how the final 5 minutes of that show aired in complete silence, except for the sound of a single slow heartbeat. In 1998, a late-night AM radio host named Warren Greaves, known for his fringe paranormal call-in show Desert Signal, claimed during a live broadcast that he was transmitting from somewhere inside the legend, a cave within the Superstition Mountains. The claim seemed like performance art, a typical ratings stunt designed to spook his small but loyal audience. Greaves had built a career on dramatizing myths: alien lights in New Mexico, ghost trails in Nevada, lost cities buried under sand. But that night's episode, titled Echoes from the Stone, would become the final live transmission of his career, and one of the strangest unsolved radio anomalies in modern broadcast history. The episode began like any other, with Greaves reading a listener letter, followed by static-heavy banter. But at exactly 1:47 a.m., his tone changed. He described descending into a narrow fissure in the rock earlier that day, following a trail of stacked stones and an intermittent vibration he felt. Not in the ground, but in the ribs. He joked that his portable rig might be, quote, the first to ever stream AM from hell. Then, unexpectedly, he went quiet for 8 full seconds, no signal drop, just breathing. Then he whispered, "It's not a cave, it's a mouth." What followed was nearly 10 minutes of fragmented commentary, Greaves describing a space that didn't echo the way it should, walls that shimmered, like they remembered light, and a low sound he claimed was pushing back against his voice. At 1:59 a.m. he stated he was approaching a triangular doorway carved into stone. 3 arrows, just like they said, he muttered. And it's warm. Then, nothing. No crackle, no feedback. The transmission remained open but silent for the next 5 minutes, except for one thing. Listeners from Phoenix to El Paso reported hearing a low, slow rhythm beneath the silence. Not a hum this time, a heartbeat. Soft, distant, but unmistakable. It continued, unbroken, steady, until 2:04 a.m., when the signal abruptly cut to dead air. The station's overnight engineer, who had been monitoring the broadcast from a studio in Tucson, called Greaves' satellite phone. No answer. He contacted park authorities and gave the GPS coordinates Greaves had claimed earlier in the show. A 3-day search found no sign of him. His Jeep was discovered near Peralta Trailhead, keys still in the ignition, gear inside. But Greaves himself was never seen again. The FCC later reviewed the recording and confirmed the signal had remained active through the silence, meaning the absence of voice or ambient sound was not a technical malfunction. The heartbeat, though not officially acknowledged, was documented by over a dozen independent tapers who had been recording the episode. Audio analysts attempted to isolate the rhythm and found that its tempo averaged 38 beats per minute, unusually slow for a human adult, but matching the infrasound pulse recorded in multiple hum-related cases across the region. Since then, Echoes from the Stone has developed cult status. Bootlegs circulate among ham radio enthusiasts and digital archivists, often accompanied by warnings. Some listeners claim to hear voices layered under the heartbeat when slowed down, whispering in fragmented syllables. Others say the silence triggers lucid dreams about underground corridors and a watching presence. Greaves' show never resumed. His studio remained untouched for years, until the building was sold in 2006. The only note left behind was written on the back of an old set list. 4 words. Still inside, not echoing. In the next part, we'll examine the physical phenomenon dubbed the stone mirror, a polished slab hidden deep in the superstitions that reflects surroundings normally invisible, and why cameras can't capture what the human eye sees in its surface. Deep within a craggy, wind-scarred gulch east of Bluff Ridge lies one of the most bizarre physical anomalies tied to the legend of the lost Dutchman's mine, an object known by those few who've seen it as the stone mirror. First reported in 1973 by 2 amateur spelunkers who never returned for a second visit, the mirror isn't glass or polished obsidian. It's a naturally smooth slab of dark basalt embedded vertically into a canyon wall, roughly 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, with a surface unnaturally reflective in low light. What makes it extraordinary, however, isn't just its clarity, it's what it reflects. According to the handful of witnesses who've stood before it, the mirror does not show the world as it is, but the world as it hides. Structures where no walls exist, faint glowing lines across the ground, and dark, door-shaped shadows where only rock stands. One hiker described watching a pine tree in the mirror slowly bend away from her, although the real tree stood still. Another swore he saw his reflection blink 5 seconds out of sync. Cameras fail to capture it. Attempts to photograph the slab result in distorted images, blurred, washed out, or overexposed. No matter the lighting conditions or equipment used, even infrared and thermal imaging produce only static. In 1999, a physicist named Alan Cho attempted to take LiDAR scans of the rock face. The scanner malfunctioned completely when pointed at the surface. The only viable recording ever recovered was a hand-drawn sketch by a Navajo guide who visited the site during a survey expedition. In his drawing, the mirror reflects a stone archway that does not appear behind the viewer in real space. Beneath the arch is a figure, tall, thin, and featureless, pointing directly at the observer. The guide refused to return to the site. "It's not a reflection," he said. "It's memory bouncing back the wrong way." Some theorists believe the stone mirror acts as a kind of lens, not into the future or past, but into a layered perception that overlaps normal space, a weak spot, a bleed-through. Possibly related to the harmonic structures mapped by Callum Healy and the resonance fields identified in Kelso's footage. An unconfirmed account from 2007 tells of a man who stood before the mirror for nearly an hour, unmoving, before suddenly collapsing. When his friend reached him, the man was whispering, "It knows I see it now," over and over. He never spoke again. Researchers have tried to mark the mirror's exact position, but GPS signals in the area become unreliable within a 50-foot radius. Compass needles spin, watches slow, and recordings often cut out during playback. A geologist once tried to chip a piece of the surface for testing. His chisel shattered. The mirror remained untouched. Whether it's a product of geological coincidence or something far stranger, the stone mirror stands as one of the most direct, visible manifestations of the mind's influence. A silent, black doorway to somewhere that doesn't reflect the world as we understand it. In the next part, we'll trace the testimony of a linguist who claims the triangle and spiral symbol isn't a warning or map, but a phoneme, a sound not meant to be spoken aloud, one that echoes not through space but through thought. In 2015, Dr. Lena Moravec, a Czech-American linguist specializing in ancient symbolic languages, published a quietly circulated monograph that proposed a radical theory about the triangle and spiral motif central to the legend of the lost Dutchman's mine, that it wasn't a symbol in the traditional sense at all, but a representation of a phoneme, a single unit of sound not spoken by any known language, but possibly intended to be felt or remembered, rather than vocalized. Her research began not in Arizona, but in southern Turkey, where she studied Neolithic cave symbols, many of which bore a passing resemblance to the spiral triangle design. Over time, she found that similar motifs had been independently carved into rock walls on multiple continents, in cultures that had never interacted, and always in contexts associated with taboo, silence, or sacred sites. When Moravec was eventually shown images of the Dutchman-related carvings, some from Helen Pierce's journals, others from the soot-covered cabin and Brandt's field sketches, she immediately noticed something. The spiral was always nested inside a converging shape, either arrows or angled lines, and always tilted slightly left. This deviation was consistent across centuries and locations. She hypothesized that the shape encoded a vibrational pattern, specifically, a shape of sound. Using phonological modeling software and spectrum mapping, she attempted to reconstruct what this pattern might sound like if rendered as audio. The result was a tone lasting 11.6 seconds, built from layered frequencies descending into near infrasound. According to her private notes, listening to the tone triggered vertigo, a sensation of falling inward, and an overwhelming awareness of being perceived. Moravec refused to share the full audio publicly. She described it as a word not made for mouths, and stated that its structure more closely resembled a mnemonic device, not meant to be spoken, but to awaken a dormant recognition in the listener. In a 2016 conference presentation titled Resonant Non-Lexical Symbols in Pre-Literate Societies, she suggested that ancient peoples may have used such forms to store and transfer memory in non-verbal formats, effectively embedding information into space using resonance and geometry. This, she argued, aligned disturbingly well with the recurring phrase found throughout the Dutchman legend, "It remembers you." Her final paper proposed that the symbol was a kind of linguistic seed, waiting to be activated by perception, and that once recognized, truly recognized, it began to unfold not externally, but inside the mind. She stopped all public appearances after that year. In 2018, a graduate student who had worked briefly under her supervision claimed that Moravec had become obsessed with the idea that thoughts themselves could be heard by the landscape. He found her in her office one evening, sitting silently in the dark, with a triangle drawn on the wall in ash and the words, "We're not hearing it, it's hearing us." She left the university months later and was not seen again. A USB device found in her locked desk drawer contained the 11.6 second tone. Those who've listened to it claim it feels more like a memory surfacing than a sound, and some report dreaming of spirals, tunnels, or being watched. The file now circulates in restricted forums under the name Trier_voice.01, and many warn not to play it near the Superstition Mountains. In the next and final part, we'll return to the very beginning, to the earliest known incident tied to the mine, long before Waltz or any map, when the land itself first changed, and a man carved a shape into stone not to guide, but to warn the future that the ground beneath us does not forget. Long before Jacob Waltz, before Spanish missionaries, before even the Apache told stories of the thunder god's dwelling, there was a man, unnamed in any surviving text, who left behind the oldest physical mark tied to the mine's legend, a carving on a sheer stone face near the base of what is now Weaver's Needle, dated by modern analysis to approximately 890 AD, centuries before European contact, and attributed to an unknown Proto-Puebloan culture, with no other known presence in that region. The carving itself, first documented in 1929 by an amateur archaeologist named Bern Ruddick, was described simply as a triangle enclosing a spiral, with angled notches along its outer edge. But what makes it extraordinary is what surrounds it. No other symbols, no decorative context, only that lone, precise shape, placed intentionally at eye level, chiseled into the hardest layer of exposed basalt, as if left not as expression, but instruction. Ruddick believed it was a map marker, perhaps indicating water, shelter, or tribal boundary. But in the 1980s, new evidence came to light when researchers used multispectral imaging to analyze the weathered stone and discovered what the naked eye had long missed: a faint secondary engraving beneath the surface layer, only visible in certain light frequencies, revealing an inscription in geometric glyphs similar to those used in archaic petroglyph traditions across the Southwest. The translation, still debated, is haunting in its simplicity. This place is not quiet, it is waiting. That phrase, just 5 words, has appeared in at least 6 other unrelated incidents over the centuries, including Father Revis's letter in 1695, Nash's final field notes, and the whispers captured beneath the heartbeat in Warren Greaves's last radio transmission. Taken together, they suggest something chilling, that long before the mine was a legend, before anyone sought treasure in these canyons, the land itself was known to echo not sound, but presence, recognizing those who passed through, marking those who looked too closely, and remembering every footprint. Some researchers now believe that what we call the Lost Dutchman's Mine was never about gold at all. The mine may never have been a place. It may have been an event, recurring in different forms across time, attached not to geography but to awareness. A pattern, seeded in the human mind like a dormant circuit, activated only when the right eyes find the wrong symbol. Those who disappear are not taken in the physical sense. They are absorbed into the hum, into the spiral, into whatever resides beneath the memory layer of the earth. In closing, the triangle within the spiral should not be seen as a treasure map, but a boundary, an ancient warning etched by someone who learned too late that there are places where sound is thought, and thought is a door. A door that opens not when you touch it, but when you understand it. And once it opens, it never fully closes again. So if you find yourself in the Superstition Mountains, standing in perfect silence beneath the moonlight, and you feel the ground pulsing under your feet, don't follow the sound. Don't listen for the hum, because if you do, it will know that you've heard it, and that's when it remembers you.